Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to objectively unpack something that sits at the very center of the Israel-Hamas conflict, the competing definitions of regional occupation. We're going to focus deeply on Hamas's specific claims of regional occupation, how they actually define those claims, and how they clash with both the facts on the ground and the counterclaims made by geopolitical analysts. To do this, we're looking at a recent, highly charged broadcast featuring Hamas spokesman Ghazi Hamad, host Piers Morgan, and a panel of military and political commentators.
By laying out the actual documents, quotes, and counter-arguments presented in this source material, we're going to build a really clear analytical roadmap of these territorial disputes. We'll be covering 1. Defining the occupation claim, 2. The 2017 Hamas Charter, 3. Justifying armed resistance, 4. The Greater Israel counterclaim, and finally 5. The two-state solution debate.
All right, Section 1. Defining the occupation claim. The core grievance. Let's dive right into this by looking directly at how Hamas defines their central argument.
To understand the conflict, you really have to understand the baseline grievance being presented. According to Hamas spokesman Ghazi Hamad, the Palestinian people have been living under an 80-year occupation. In his interview, he repeatedly frames the entire Palestinian experience over the last 8 decades as one defined by profound suffering and oppression. He argues, quite passionately, that the international community has spent this entire time just watching the situation unfold without stepping in to help.
So what's driving this? Hamad points to some very specific systemic issues as the core drivers of their cause. He lists mass killings, the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, the confiscation of Palestinian lands, and what he describes as the complete destruction of the peace process by Israeli forces. You see, for Hamas, this isn't just about a recent border dispute. It's an 80-year systemic framework that they argue leaves Palestinians with absolutely no other options.
Moving on to Section 2, the 2017 Hamas Charter and defining the boundaries.
To grasp the literal geographic boundaries of this claim, we've got to look at the official paperwork. It's one thing to hear a spokesperson speak in broad terms, right? But how is this territorial claim actually codified in writing? Well, what's incredibly interesting here is how strictly the 2017 Hamas Charter defines the territory in question. During the panel debate, retired Green Beret Matt Tardio actually pulled out the text of this charter. He read straight from paragraph 2, which states that the land of Palestine extends from the River Jordan in the east to the Mediterranean in the west. It defines this entire region as an integral territorial unit and the home of the Palestinian people, explicitly claiming that the establishment of the Zionist entity doesn't annul their right to this entire land.
Tardio highlights a really stark discrepancy here. He contrasts Hamas's massive regional claim with the factual reality on the ground just prior to recent escalations. He points out that when Hamas talks about occupation, their charter implies the entirety of the region, because factually speaking, there were absolutely zero Israeli troops inside Gaza on October 7th. Tardio's argument is that Hamas's definition of occupation isn't just limited to a military presence in Gaza, it is a foundational rejection of Israel's presence in the broader region entirely.
Okay, Section 3, justifying armed resistance, means and methods.
So how does this documented definition actually translate into action? We've seen the geographical claim, but how does the charter instruct its followers to reclaim that territory? Well, Tardio points directly to paragraph 25 of the charter, which explicitly endorses armed resistance by all means and methods. The document frames this not just as a tactic, but as a legitimate right guaranteed by divine and international laws, positioning armed resistance as the strategic choice for protecting the Palestinian people.
Which brings us to the absolutely crucial question: does this specific clause justify the events that took place on October 7th? This is exactly where the panel deeply fractured, really exposing the massive chasm and how different sides view the rules of engagement and morality in this conflict. While Hamad argues it was a justified effort to lift a 15-year siege on Gaza and to take soldiers hostage to free Palestinian prisoners, the host and analysts fiercely counter that these actions crossed every moral and humanitarian line. Host Piers Morgan and U.S. Navy SEAL veteran Rob O'Neill both vehemently pushed back. They stated that taking hostages, including children and the elderly, and committing massacres at a music festival are not acts of resistance, but indefensible crimes of barbarism. Hamad insisted that Hamas policy doesn't target civilians and that any such deaths were quote-unquote mistakes, but Morgan flatly rejected that defense as a brazen lie, pointing directly to the video evidence posted by the attackers themselves.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, the Greater Israel counterclaim and territorial ambitions.
We need to see how this builds into the broader geopolitical counterclaims presented in the source material. Because the debate isn't just about what Hamas claims, it's also about what analysts believe the Israeli government is attempting to achieve territorially. Analyst Cenk Uygur presents a completely inverted view of the region. He argues that it's actually Israel executing a territorial acquisition strategy. Uygur claims that Israel now occupies 70% of Gaza, completely controls the West Bank, and harbors active territorial ambitions over southern Lebanon and southern Syria.
Uygur is absolutely adamant that Israel's military operations are fundamentally about expanding borders. On the panel, he literally says this was never about self-defense, it was about land acquisition. He accuses the Israeli government of forcing over 2 million Palestinians into just 30% of Gaza, an area he describes as an open-air concentration camp. To Uygur, the narrative of self-defense is just a smokescreen for a much, much larger expansionist goal.
And man, this brilliantly illustrates the dueling narratives at play here. Connecting the dots, Uygur argues that while Hamas has a theoretical charter claiming the land from the river to the sea, they realistically have no actual power to execute it. Conversely, he asserts that the Israeli government is the one actually holding the power, taking the land, and actively executing control over that exact same geographic area. It is a fascinating juxtaposition, a documented, theoretical claim on one side versus what an analyst argues is the physical, executed reality on the other.
That brings us to our final part, Section 5, the two-state solution debate and finding a middle ground.
So how do these absolutist territorial claims actually measure up against international peace efforts? When both sides point fingers claiming the other wants the entirety of the land, where on earth does the middle ground lie? Well, host Piers Morgan pushes back against both extremes, arguing that the only viable path forward is an independent state for both Israelis and Palestinians. He firmly rejects the absolutist river-to-the-sea paradigm, whether it's coming from the Hamas Charter or from hardline members of the Israeli government. Morgan insists that the only way to break this endless cycle of violence is the internationally recognized two-state solution.
Maintaining a pretty strictly neutral stance throughout the broadcast, Morgan pairs his severe condemnation of the October 7th attacks with really heavy criticism of the scale and devastation of the Israeli military response. His position essentially rests on four main pillars: absolute condemnation of Hamas's terrorism, sharp criticism of the Israeli government's military overreach, which he notes has made 80% of Gaza uninhabitable, a core belief that Palestinians and Israelis deserve the exact same human rights, and unwavering support for a two-state solution. To put things into perspective, he cites a truly staggering human cost, estimating nearly 80,000 casualties at the time of the broadcast. For Morgan, this is stark proof that utilizing armed resistance to resolve occupation claims has been a spectacular strategic failure for the people of Gaza. Morgan challenged the Hamas spokesman directly. He asked, how could their strategy possibly be seen as a success when it's resulted in massive civilian slaughter, the flattening of Gaza, and absolutely zero progress toward peace or liberation? Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question. If both sides operate with fundamentally incompatible definitions of the land itself, with one side relying on a charter demanding the entire region and analysts claiming the other side is actively conquering it, how can a true peace agreement ever be negotiated? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you next time.